So you've got started with your decluttering, you've gone in with good intentions, all guns blazing, ready to make your space a minimalist utopia. But before you go any further, there might be some decluttering mistakes that you're making that could derail your progress. So in this video, I'm going to go through 13 decluttering mistakes you might be making and how to avoid them. So mistake number 1 might be that you're not decluttering enough. It might be that you declutter a few things from a certain room and that's it. And further down the line, you become overwhelmed and find that there's more you want to declutter. Now, I'm not saying that you have to declutter absolutely everything the first time round. What I found when I was decluttering is that I do a room and I would really give it a good go of decluttering. But over time, as I did more decluttering in other rooms, I also started to think about things that I'd left in the particular room, say the bedroom, for example. And this kind of, I guess, decluttering mindset and thinking about what I did really need and what I didn't really need, it got me reviewing what I'd already decluttered in the bedroom and thinking about, actually, there are other things I could get rid of too. But initially, if you're just kind of maybe getting rid of 2 or 3 things, that's not really enough. And I've been there. I've kind of made half-hearted efforts to declutter, but I've not really done it thoroughly. So what might be helpful to do is list down all the rooms that you want to declutter and then sort of subheadings as to each section of that room that you want to look at. So for the kitchen, it might be the kitchen cupboards with the plates and the cups, and then the cupboard where you keep all the cleaning supplies, all the food. And I'm not saying that you declutter food, but it might be that looking at those cupboards, you might think, okay, well, rather than buying any more food, maybe I need to focus on using up this food. And the same with things like cleaning supplies. Number 2 is decluttering other people's stuff. Just don't do it. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the arguments that will ensue. I know it can be frustrating if you're decluttering and you're living with somebody where decluttering or minimalism and that type of philosophy isn't as in the forefront of their mind as it is yours. And I think we have to try and accept people for where they're at. They're not at the same place as us. We might have shifted our mindset around changing our spending habits, but that's not necessarily what the other person has done. It might be that over time, as they see you declutter and they see you be more mindful of your spending habits and what you bring into the house, that they will start to shift that as well. I actually did find this when we were decluttering and I was getting pretty ruthless about things that I didn't need. My husband went back to a room of his stuff that he had already decluttered, and he went back and said, well, actually, I think I can get rid of far more of this than I have done, which was nice. I mean, that was great. I didn't pressure him into that. I didn't suggest that. I think he just saw me being quite objective about what I was getting rid of, and that helped him to do the same. So mistake number 3 is not decluttering by categories. So things like bathroom supplies, if you've got more than one bathroom in your home, these might be scattered around. So decluttering by category means you're less likely to miss things. It might also be that you pick up on any duplicates that you've got, so you know not to buy any more of that thing. You know that you're going to need to use those things up first before you buy anything else. Also, there's this thing called context switching. So if you're switching between tasks, it can be really hard to refocus on the task that you're doing. And I do wonder if the same could be said for decluttering different rooms. So decluttering your living room, for example, versus the bathroom. They're 2 different settings. There are different things that you need to be thinking about in terms of decluttering. And I think that if you're going around the home haphazardly rather than doing it by category, potentially the focus of your attention, because it's going into a different environment, maybe that might affect the decluttering process. I don't know. But I think you're more likely to do a more thorough declutter if you plan your categories in advance and you do it based off of the plan that you've got. Mistake number 4 is thinking that you need to declutter everything at once. And I think I made this mistake at the beginning, thinking, yeah, get rid of everything. And whilst I was ruthless, I was pretty good at being objective. What I did find is that I would come back to different rooms at a later date, having had a think on whether I really needed those things that I'd left or whether I could declutter them. So I think taking that pressure off yourself that you feel like you need to do it all at once is really helpful. If there are things that you're really unsure of decluttering, why not put them in a box, mark it as things as that you need to come back to, maybe leave the box for a few weeks and then come back to it and look through it. We found that we did that, but we didn't plan that. So planning would have been far better, but we found that there were things that we'd boxed up. We got on with decluttering other rooms, and then we came back to these boxes and we thought, there's far too much in here that we don't really need. For example, we had so many photos from years ago, but of things that why would you keep them? So there were photos I'd taken as a little girl with my first camera when I was, I think, about 12 years old. And they're like blurred photos of animals at the zoo that you could barely make out what these animals were. Both of us, we just thought, well, we don't need these. Let's get rid of them. So make it more intentional, make it more deliberate. If there are are things you're really not sure of, box them up, come back to them at a later date, and then make a decision. Mistake number 5 is not addressing why the clutter built up in the first place. Sometimes my spending has been a coping mechanism for when I've not felt too good, maybe when I've felt sad or stressed, or sometimes it's been fear of missing out on something that the marketing has done a very good job of making me think that I need, and I need to buy it now, otherwise I'll never be able to get it again. And for myself, I don't want us to have done all this decluttering and then have to do this level of decluttering again in a few years' time, because otherwise it feels like it will be a waste of time. So getting clear about why we purchase, why we buy things in the first place, and what we can do to reduce the risk of buying things we don't need is going to prevent us from getting back to the same position that we've just come from. Mistake number 6 is getting caught up in feelings of guilt about decluttering. So feeling guilty about decluttering something doesn't mean you shouldn't declutter it. It's just a range of different feelings that you're probably going to feel as you go through the decluttering process. There were items that I decluttered that I felt really quite upset to declutter because of the sentimental connection to them. But these items were broken. They weren't of any use to me anymore. They weren't going to be of any use to anybody else. And I guess what had held me onto them is the memories that I had attached to them. But just because the physical object isn't there anymore, the memories will remain. And to be honest, when I did declutter those things, there was a relief that came with that. There was a relief that I didn't have to think about that thing anymore and make a decision about what to do with it. I had the memory of the person that that item was connected to. The fact that that physical object was no longer around had not diminished those memories and those special times at all. The emotions we feel are not necessarily a signal for us to not declutter a thing. Sometimes they might be, but these emotions may keep us stuck in the decluttering process. And like I said in tip number 4, if you're really unsure whether to declutter something, put it in a box, leave it for a few weeks, and come back to it. Number 7 is beating yourself up for having all of these things that you don't really need. I must admit, I found that when I was decluttering, I was quite angry at myself at certain points for having all this stuff that I no longer used, or the fact that I'd held on to it for so long when really I knew I hadn't needed it and it would be better off with somebody else. For me, this was books mainly. I do love books, but I had a bookshelf of books that I hadn't looked at in years. Some of these books I'd never read, most of them I had, but I was never going to read them again. And other people were likely to get much more use and enjoyment out of them. So why had I held on to them? I'd held on to them in the hope that I might need them in future, but that was 5+ years ago and still I hadn't touched them. And so it's easy to beat yourself up and put yourself down for making this mistake, but really that's probably going to make you feel guilty, make you feel bad about yourself, and then you'll get stuck in all that. And if we get stuck in our emotions, they can stop us from seeing clearly about what we need to do. So try to be kind to yourself. We all fall into the trap of holding on to things we no longer need. But if we can take a step back from the emotion and think about really objectively whether we do need this thing, whether we are actually going to use it, even though we haven't used it for a few years, that can help us in our decision to declutter. Mistake number 8 is not following through on getting rid of stuff. So what I did when I decluttered things, I deliberately left the bags in our living room. 1, so that they would annoy me enough that I would take them to the charity shop or the recycling centre, and 2, as a physical reminder to do that. If the bags had stayed upstairs, out of sight, out of mind, it would have taken ages to get them shifted. Mistake number 9 is allowing a lack of motivation to lead you to give up on decluttering. Decluttering is hard work, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And believe me, after my husband and I had spent most of a week off of work decluttering, I was physically exhausted and mentally exhausted. But what kept me going through that process was the thought of the end result, of knowing a few different things actually, knowing that the space was going to be less cluttered and that we were going to be able to move into our smaller home and not feel hemmed in, that a lot of the stuff that I was decluttering was going to be used by other people and made good use of, and that the other stuff was going to be recycled. And a sense that this was the start of me shifting my mindset back into a place of not over consuming, of being much more mindful about my purchases and a different way of living. And often that can be a good thing. If we're struggling with motivation to do a particular thing, keep the end result in mind. Keep your why at the forefront of your mind as well. Why are you doing this? Why is this decluttering process so important for you? And that can help you to keep pushing forward as well. Mistake number 10 is thinking that you need to be a perfectionist when it comes to decluttering or a minimalist lifestyle or philosophy. I do have a tendency to be perfectionistic. I'm a bit all or nothing. If I do something, I need to either do it perfectly or not at all, which isn't a helpful mindset to be in. And certainly there's lots of content on the internet where it can look look very unattainable in terms of minimalist standards. You know, the bare walls, you know, hardly any furniture. I mean, it all looks very nice. The aesthetic looks very nice, but to me, minimalism, that is a form of aesthetic, but I'm adopting a minimalist philosophy rather than an aesthetic. I don't know if that's how you say that word. But to my mind, if you are being more mindful about your consumption, about the things that you're bringing into your home, in my mind, should become less cluttered anyway, because you're not buying all of these things you don't need. Your home isn't filling up with all of these things and just taking up space. But again, even the philosophy can be taken to extremes. I see videos of people that only have so many items in their wardrobe or so many furniture pieces, and I just think it's not helpful to put an arbitrary number on what makes you a minimalist. You're only a minimalist if you own 20 pieces of clothing, for example. I just don't think that's helpful, and I think that's missing the point of minimalism and decluttering. Mistake number 11 is worrying about whether you need this thing in the future, those just in case items. Now, I'm not saying that you have to get rid of all of your just in case items. I've seen a few people talk about that if it is a just in case item, you should get rid of it. But I don't think that's applicable to everybody. I have a dress that I've worn to 2 weddings, and I keep it in my wardrobe just in case I get either invited to another wedding or another special occasion that might call for me wearing a dress. The dress doesn't take up much room. It's there. Maybe in the future, if I really haven't used it again, then I'll donate it. But for me, I'd rather be able to go to a special occasion and not have the worry of spending money on a special outfit that I'll probably only wear a few times. And I'm mindful that for some people, having a what if or a just in case item can make the difference between them saving even a small amount of money, which might be small to us, might be a lot of money to this person. So I think, like with everything, minimalism is dependent on your situation and your circumstances, and I don't think we can apply blanket rules to everybody. Mistake number 12 is not being mindful about the mental and emotional toll that decluttering can take, as well as the physical if you're moving around a lot of large items. I don't think this was something I was really prepared for. Like I say, my husband and I did pretty much a week of decluttering, and yes, I was physically tired, but more than that, I was very mentally and emotionally tired. It felt like the bit of an end of an era in some ways, what with us due to be moving home, and all of those emotions were built up there as well as the sentimental items that I was saying goodbye to, that I no longer had any use for, or they were just broken and nobody was going to get any value from them. And so what I would say is just be mindful of that, and it can be a difficult process. That is okay, and I guess that is why it can be so hard for us to let go of these things. This is why we can build up this clutter, because we build these emotional connections to these objects that for whatever reason hold that value for us. Mistake number 13 is thinking that you have to go to extremes with your decluttering or minimalism. We all have our own unique circumstances. We draw upon different elements of minimalist philosophy to suit what we need. Someone's version of minimalism is not going to be my version. I do not want to be an extreme minimalist. I want to have stuff in my house. Stuff is not bad, but I want to make sure that the things that I have serve a purpose, I get joy out of them, and that they're not just here taking up space. They have a reason to be here. So please don't think you have to follow the extreme minimalists, or even if they're not extreme, that you have to follow what everyone else is doing. I think it's helpful to sit down and think about what minimalism means to you as a philosophy, as a lifestyle. If you want to have a pretty bare space, then that's fine. So what are you going to need to do to get to that point? If your minimalist philosophy is about buying less or buying more mindfully, making more considered purchases, then equally, what are you going to do about that? By the way, let me know down in the comments of any decluttering mistakes that you've made so that we can all learn from those as well. And of course, as we know, decluttering isn't the end of the story. What we need to do is find ways to help us stop buying more stuff so that we don't end up in the same position. So if you want some tips to help you stop buying stuff you don't need, then check out the video that's on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.